Welcome to Drink Beer, Think Beer, the podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Hall. Spring is almost here, which means that plants will start to come back to life in the colder parts of the country, and foraging has always been a part of beer. On this episode, we're going to hear from a Texas brewer who's making the most of what's growing around his brewery. And we'll get into it all in a moment. But first, please go visit allaboutbeer.com for original articles, reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Beer Travelers, Brewer to Brewer, and the All About Beer podcast by simply searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows. This show and all of the work we do is supported by you. You can visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer to help keep the content fresh. And a reminder that a few bucks goes a long way to fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising on this show, you can email info@allaboutbeer.com. If you're a smoked beer fan, and of course you are, check out This Week in Rauch Beer. Search for the Facebook group or follow on Instagram and Twitter at TW Rauch Beer. And if you're a brewing professional, on May 9th in Nashville during the Craft Brewers Conference, join us at Brewing and Blending for a very special Camp Rauch Beer event. The smoky goodness starts at 4 p.m. Trevor Nearburg is the founder of Beerburg Brewing in the Texas Hill Country. After his brother started homebrewing, Trevor got roped in, and together they decided to quit their jobs and become brewers. Both took jobs stacking cases and scrubbing floors at Real Ale Brewing, one of the 50 largest breweries in the U.S. at the time and the second largest in Texas. They both quickly moved up, and after a year of working various jobs in the packaging hall, Trevor made a significant jump to become the head brewer of Uncle Billy's, a local brew pub, and his brother got into management at Real Ale. At the time, Trevor grew Uncle Billy's from a 600 barrel per year taproom into producing 3,000 barrels per year and distributing all over Texas. He also helped to opus the latest iteration of the Celis Brewery. Eventually, he became fascinated with brewing and local ingredients and wanted to create a brewery devoted to this, and the idea for Beerburg slowly started forming. The plans came together, and he opened Beerburg in late January of 2020. So after a rough few years, he's now back to devoting time into wild crafting beers with native ingredients and local yeast strains. And that's what we're going to talk about on this episode. He spoke to me from the brewery. Here's our conversation. Tell me about the land. Tell me about Hill Country outside of Austin and what it's like when you look out your window.
Oh man, it's so cool. My jaw dropped when I first saw the property. We didn't intend to open up as big a place as we did. I was looking for something more like 3 acres or something where I could get like 100 people in there. It'd be like this small little country place where I had a lot of freedom to like experiment and explore and just play around. But we found this property that was 15 acres. And it's not like a hill per se, but there's like a gentle slope that this property has. And we're at the very top of that gentle slope. And we overlook a 70,000 acre nature preserve called the Shield Ranch. And as the area around Austin develops, we're in this pocket that's surrounded by this nature preserve. So we have this beautiful view, and we've put just like the building was kind of designed for the space. So when I say we didn't mean to be as big as we are, once we found the property, it was like we have this like beautiful forested beer garden, and the building can go right here, and we can do all these windows, and we overlook this just sweeping view of the hill country. And what's kind of funny is that I didn't even think about it when we got the property, but the Shield Ranch is where I did my Eagle Scout project. And so there are 3 miles of trails on this nature preserve that I can just pop over. And I've gotten to know the owners and managers of the Shield Ranch now. And part of my foraging is that we go over and hike those trails that I did when I was, 16 years old. And we forage along there. And the 15 acres that I have has some ingredients that we forage for. But it's mostly cedars and oaks, which do provide some things. So yeah, it's a fun little spot.
What is growing in and around that you find interesting for foraging?
I have a list. But
You came prepared. I dig it.
yeah, well, so part of this is funny. Like I mentioned to you privately earlier that my memory is not great, so I take a lot of notes. So I'm almost like inadvertently writing a book, kind of like the Homebrewers Almanac from scratch.
Okay.
A huge inspiration reading that book. But I'm trying to like list all the ingredients, like where I find them, how to harvest them, how we use them in brewing, all this stuff. But I'd say on Beerburg's property itself, Agarita, wild grapes, acorns. We harvest acorns. I've actually brought yarrow, horehound, and mugwort from my family's property where I do most of my foraging. And I've kind of transplanted them there. And I can get enough to do a real small batch, and those little things are growing. I should clarify that with foraging, like I don't grow things. I'm not a gardener. I tend to kill plants,
Okay.
but I'm very good at finding them in the wild. So, oh my gosh, one of the most prolific things we have at Beerburg is persimmon, and it's not the big orange persimmon that most people are familiar with. It's a small black persimmon that kind of has like a cherry molasses flavor. And our beer garden's cool because like it's half persimmon trees and half oaks. And so in the summertime, the fruit appears, and then kind of towards the end of the summer, it starts to turn black, and we get, oh my gosh, I've probably got like 100 pounds of persimmon fruit, and it's all like a lot of it's still sitting in the freezer. But yeah, the beer. Sorry, I'm all over the place.
That's good. No. This is yeah.
Okay, so a bit off topic from the original question, but one of the main things I like about Beerburg, what I really wanted people to experience, was to be able to be surrounded by and a part of the ingredients that we're brewing with. And so, for instance, like I try and make sure that I freeze and hold on to a lot of persimmon, either the fruit itself or like a syrup that we make, and hold on to it for next year, so that as the persimmons are ripening, we can brew a batch of beer with the persimmons, and then people can be in the beer garden, you know, and whether it's the agarita berries or the persimmons or the horehound or the acorns and the oaks, you know, they can be sitting next to this plant. So we've kept the beer garden pretty wild, and you're drinking the beer that's based all around this ingredient, and you can both connect to it physically and emotionally, and like you can imbibe it and really get like a full experience of getting to know that plant. So
what is agarita? I'm unfamiliar with that.
Yeah, it's a funny plant. It's one of the most potent medicinal plants we have in Texas, and most people, it's like a spiky bush that just grows everywhere, and it's hard to kill. And if people don't like the plant, which is often the case, they just end up ripping it all out of the ground. But because it's really thorny and it can be really obnoxious. But it's I think one of the things about foraging that I've gotten to know is like so many plants that I've hated my whole life, I now have this amazing relationship with, because I actually sat down with literally, there's this thing called plant sitting, where you just sit with a plant, and however you feel inclined to do it, you just kind of get to know the plant. I do a lot of like breath work when I'm doing that, or I like try and meditate and kind of just like feel out the plant. And that's not an uncommon thing. That's something that everyone needs to get to know them. So agarita is one of those that if you were to just stumble across it, you'd be like, ew, spiky bush. I don't like you. But then like right now, it's full of these beautiful yellow flowers. And as I'm walking the dogs in the morning, there's a trail next to my house, and you just walk through these like clouds of honeysuckle sweet air. And it's one of the most rewarding things that I have in the morning is like just walking through these agarita bushes and getting this wonderful aroma and these beautiful yellow flowers when nothing else is flowering right now. So I'm trying to figure out a way to capture the flower flavor, but I'm not sure how to do that yet. But then in May, they get these really nice little red berries that taste kind of like cranberries. And this is such a good example of like a foraging plant, because you look at this plant and you go, spiky leaves, red berries, that's poisonous, it's gonna kill me.
Right. Yeah.
You know? But no.
Somewhere deep in your genealogy, it's like, we evolved by not eating this. Please don't mess up our family bloodline.
Yeah. But then, you know, I guess that extends to a lot of ingredients in Texas, like prickly pear cactus and mesquite trees. Like these things are all pretty rough, have thorns, and like there's ants that cover the mesquite trees, and then there's rattlesnakes that I'm always encountering when I'm harvesting prickly pears. It's a dangerous game out here in Texas. But anyway, the agarita plant, the berries taste like cranberries, and people make jellies and jams out of them. Harvesting them can be difficult, but once you get the hang of it, it's like really fun. And then the medicinal aspect comes from the roots and the stems. They have berberine in them. And so it's like, I know a decent amount of medicinal stuff, but my focus is on brewing. But the berberine is like a good antiviral, and it helps if you have like if you have food poisoning. He's my dog.
No, all good.
If you have like food poisoning or something, you can take that and it'll cure your food poisoning.
In your brewing career, you've focused on brewing, I think, more common styles, or better known styles of IPAs and pilsners, and I know you're brewing those on your larger system at your brewery. But what drew you to the idea of foraging for the purposes of making beers?
Yeah, it is interesting because when I went to work, okay, I'm too long-winded. So
no, you're good.
It starts back at Real Ale Brewing. My first year in brewing was at Real Ale, and there were kind of two people that I looked up to at Real Ale. Eric Overshock, who was like this heavy metal big guy, long hair all the way like down his back, and just like brewed whatever the hell he wanted. He was the head brewer, he was the brewmaster. And then Tim Schwartz is one of the owners, and he's got a long history of brewing in Austin. And Tim is like the BJCP judge. Like everything has to be exactly to style. You brew it this way, and if it's not that way, it's wrong, right? And so I remember this when I got the job at Real Ale, and my brother and I were just brewing at home constantly, reading every brew book we could get our hands on. We would make presentations of the brewing books and then present them to each other. And it was like really nerdy and fun. But I remember going like, I really want to get to know Vienna malt. And so I was like, I'm going to brew 100% Vienna malt. And Eric was like, fuck yeah, do it. Like, there's no rules, just like have fun. And then Tim was like pissed. He was like, nobody brews 100% Vienna malt. That beer's going to suck. What the hell are you thinking? Like, he got mad. And it was so I had these very like conflicting mentors at Real Ale, but I've never been so once I left Real Ale, I went to work at Uncle Billy's, and they were the first brew pub in Texas to go through a distributor once the laws changed in like 2011 or 2012.
Okay.
And so their goal was to grow the distribution network. And so I ended up brewing 20 barrel batches of 3 beers over and over and over again. But my philosophy, even from the start, was I got into brewing because it was just fun and exciting and like fuck the system kind of a thing, So that mentality has kind of stayed with me. And I I have a tremendous amount of respect for brewers that hone in on styles that they really want to nail down and be the best at. So like Amos and Brian Peters, Amos Lowe and Brian Peters over at ABGB have won like every single year for their lagers. And that's what they brew. And they don't deviate a whole lot from that. And they won't tell you shit about how they brew them because that's theirs and they've worked really hard on it. And I respect that.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoy getting to know new styles, new ingredients, new ways of brewing. I enjoy the innovation of it. I like to play and have fun. So even as I was brewing these same beers over and over again at Uncle Billy's, I was always like trying to find new things to like sneak in and like just have taproom exclusive stuff that like I just try new stuff. And so it started with things like using cacao nibs or making a beer with honey. And then I would go to a farmer's market and I'd meet somebody and it was like, oh, this is cool. Like I should do a collaboration with this person. And then it just like, I can't say that there was ever a moment that it like happened, but there was just this path that I followed that led me to more and more local. And I think at one point I read the book Brewing Local because I go hiking a lot and I'm out in nature a lot. And I've always just like looked around and seen plants like agarita. And I've been like, that could kill me, or it could make a very delicious beer, but I don't know how to do that.
Only one way to find out. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, you hear about all these spices and herbs and things that people use in culinary stuff, but I was like, there's things here. I know there's stuff here that we can use, but I can't find any resources on what to do with it. And so just like as I learned how to brew well in my classic styles at Uncle Billy's, I never stopped trying to make sure that I had my basics down because I felt like if I'm going to brew with the weird stuff, I better have like a really good understanding of what I'm putting it in. And like I always wanted to craft beers around the ingredients. So even if I don't brew a style, I want to make sure that I'm like just the fundamentals are there so that I can experiment. I don't know. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay. Okay, I can keep rambling or ask another question.
What was your next thought? Because I don't want to. I can take it in a couple of different directions, but yeah.
Yeah, well, just feel free to guide me. So after reading Brewing Local, and I didn't realize it until I went back and read the book like last year, that there was this one section on Beers Made by Walking, which is an organization from Eric Steen, right?
Yeah, it's a great org. Yeah.
So cool. And I'm working with him now, but I remember I read this little paragraph that was like, there's this guy and he takes people on hikes in Colorado and they learn from local experts about all the ingredients around on this hike. And then they can either, go out and forage that, or they can find it, or they can get a supplier, or they can just brew a beer that's like, hey, I saw this purple flower and now I've made this purple beer to represent the purple flower, or something like that. And I just thought that was so cool. And I kind of just started to seek more information around that. And I picked up some more books like, I don't know, Wildcraft Brewers, Sacred Herbal Healing Beers and stuff like that. Definitely the Homebrewers Almanac, which I mentioned earlier. And it was always like consultant herbalist. And so I didn't really understand how to do that. But I think a good place to start for people that find themselves starting to ask these questions about like, what can I brew locally? Or like, hey, I know that there's this ingredient, but like, what do I do with it? I found some free herb walks. It turns out there's a really thriving herbalist community in Austin. I shouldn't have been surprised, but I started going on free herb walks and asking way too many questions, way more than anybody else. And then got to know the head of one of the two main herbalism schools in Austin. And that just kind of really started to open my network of both resources and people to ask, and just to like start to, kind of crowdsource some of this stuff. And what's funny is that like a lot of the people in herbalism don't use these ingredients for culinary purposes. It's just medicine. So they're not always like concerned with how they taste. And so there's still a lot
is a problematic for beer, but yeah.
Yeah. And I loved getting to know the plants, and I think it is important to know the medicine and to know how we interact with them, and how we're connected to them in ways that we may not have realized. So, which is hard to describe until you do it. But like, yeah, once I at a fundamental level, just like, is this poison or is this good? Once you start to get to know that, you can start experimenting. And then there are a lot of resources out there that once I figured it out, it's like, okay, there's people that are doing this, and then there's some ground rules that like generally use this much or that much, which when you're foraging definitely varies by region and source. So like, that was fun to get to know. The recipes in Sacred Herbal and Healing Beers call for absurd amounts of herbs that will ruin any beer. But it's a historical reference, not a brewing guide.
Yeah. So can we talk about process for a minute then, of
Absolutely.
What you've learned? So you're doing a lot of these on a 1.5 barrel system. So you have your proper nano setup in your brew house, and I'm wondering what you've learned in the 3 or so years that you've been doing this, or I no longer, but what you've learned over the last couple of years as to ingredients, amounts of boil times, of additions. It's sort of an open-ended, because I don't know what you've learned, so I'm curious.
Right. And I will say it has been tough, because I really got into all this right before open. Like when I left Uncle Billy's in like 2017, and for 3 years I was essentially a construction manager, and had a hard time brewing. I was brewing at home, but in those 3 years, I was starting to get to know this stuff. And then I did a year in herbalism school. And then very quickly after I completed herbalism school, we were preparing to open Beerburg. And so there was like a couple months in between. And then the pandemic hit, and I became owner and not so much brewer. And it's tough looking back on all that, because I wanted to brew so badly, but so much of my time was just spent trying to figure out how not to, or just how to stay open, how to keep all my employees with jobs, how to make sure everybody got paid, how to like just make sure the business stayed alive. And so I definitely have been experimenting a lot, but I would say like, even just this year has been the first year that I'm like, I have shed a lot of my responsibilities, and I am now moving back into the brewery. But trial and error when using foraging is kind of an unfortunate necessary evil, because when I would find an ingredient and be like, okay, I know I can brew with this, I know what it is, I've found recipes that use it, and then I would brew kind of based on the information that I found, and it was always way off, like unpalatable.
Yeah.
And I think, based on wherever you are, your ingredients are going to taste different. I think in Texas, it's just a harsher climate, and maybe that's why our herbs are so much more intense. But let's see, like, I'm going to try and find one. Like, I know juniper has been the bane of my existence. I love brewing juniper. Ours is very medicinal. And so I even heard, in an earlier episode of this podcast, like a little bit goes a long way, and it's so
Yeah.
true. So I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to minimize the medicinal aspect of juniper. And what I ended up doing was making a syrup out of the berries, which can, like, after brewing a bunch of, you can use the berries and it tastes great. But I was always like, there's still just like this medicinal aspect that's tough. And so I made a syrup with it, and that really toned it down. And it kind of gave me a little bit more control over the variability and how intense the flavor is in those berries. So if I was to just take a handful and throw it in, I don't always know what I'm going to get. But
Right.
if I can make a syrup and I can taste that syrup and just kind of like, do the thing where pour a glass of beer and put a little syrup in there and kind of see where it goes, and then kind of scale up as you see fit. But using a syrup that has a uniform flavor can be a lot more helpful. And then with the branches, like this whole filter, if I was to try and filter my beer through the juniper branches in Texas, again, I've done it, it's undrinkable. But I was reading in Historic Brewing Techniques about how it's not just that they filter the beer through the juniper boughs, they actually brew with a juniper extract where they take their HLT in Historic Brewing. It's just in a pot.
Right.
You have their brewing water. And they throw in some juniper branches, and then they brew with that. And I was thinking, like, okay, that could knock down, and then, that's just making a tea, right? And why making a tea is different from throwing the branches into the boil kettle versus doing some other techniques. Why that tastes different is beyond me. I can't explain that, but there is some difference. So what I ended up doing was, I have this oil extraction kit, which you can like Google essential oil extraction thing, and it's like this cool little glass thing on a heating pad or a hot plate, and you essentially steam the herbs, and then all that steam gets condensed. It's just a little still, and it'll separate the oil from the steam distillate of the plant. And so what I ended up doing was taking that, it's called a hydrosol. And if you just go real low and slow and steam the juniper and then pull the essential oil off, and you can use that for like candles and I don't know, like what else? Anyway,
Yeah.
You can use the hydrosol, and that hydrosol, what's nice about using that instead of just throwing juniper branches in your mash or your boil or whatever is that it's so clean, and there's no lingering, like, sticky, sappy medicinal bitterness. But nobody told me that. I just had to kind of like brew 20 batches of really shitty juniper beer. So like I kept having the amount of juniper, and then we ended up putting the boughs in the mash, and we figured out that, yeah, putting the boughs in the mash does reduce the medicinal aspect. And then, and then I found out that juniper produces more oil in the summer because it's really hot in Texas, and it's trying to protect itself from that heat. So we were like, we brewed this batch in the spring, and we were like, that's it. That's the recipe. We nailed it. And then come summer, we brewed it again, and I was just like, what happened? Like, did we write down everything wrong or what? But no, it just turns out there's like 2 to 3 times as much oil on the plant. So
Wow.
Anyway,
no, but that, I mean, it's got to be frustrating, but it's also kind of super fun, especially in such a homogenized ingredient marketplace these days, where you can what to expect from certain hop lots. What to expect when you're ordering malt. I imagine it's frustrating, but it's also, I don't know, like fun rustic brewing of.
Yeah. It's cool. Yeah. It's like, I don't know why more people don't do this. It's so, I feel so connected to everything I'm doing, and I feel like, I don't know, it's it's hard to describe what this is like, but like being a part of like going out and finding this thing and bringing it back in and like being very intentional about it. Like I think one of the things that is really important is that you don't just like, oh, yarrow, I can go just grab yarrow, and then you just wipe out the yarrow population on the land. Like it's just like, this is mine and like I own it and it serves me. Like no, you go out and you create, like I know each patch of yarrow on this property, and like each one has its own little quirks, and I know like how much I want to harvest from each spot, or if like this year it's going to be another drought year and it's going to be tough to harvest, and so I may not be brewing yarrow beers this year. I may really leave those patches alone and let them like really grow and to survive so that they're there when we do finally get some rain. I can go back and harvest some more, but there's
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to bring that up though, just on the responsibility to the land and not just picking everything. So for anybody who's thinking about getting into this, I mean, there's responsibilities to the plant, to the land, to your neighbors, to to the earth, of not promoting or participating in deforestation, for lack of a better term. I don't know what it would be with plants, but
Yeah.
and I imagine that you've had those conversations.
Yeah. And I mean, I really try and make sure that I don't get too, I don't know. I call it woo-woo-y. Like when people get like a little too woo-woo-y. Um, I want to make sure that everything's approachable and that people are excited about this. And you don't have to be like really weird to get into it, but you gotta be a little weird. But when it's not just a conversation with people, but like it's a conversation with the land and the plants. And that's what's interesting, is like, I think, I don't want to repeat too much of myself, but it's really when you start to really pay attention to what's around you and connect with it, there is a little bit of an ego loss, or at least there should be. And I'm not trying to tell anybody what to do.
Yeah.
I have found that I just naturally gain partnerships with the plants. It's hard to describe, but like each one ends up having their own personality, which is crazy. But you get to know them, you get to know what they like, you get to know, like you can reach out and touch a plant and know whether or not you should harvest that part of it. And it becomes very intuitive. And it is really important because it's not about brewing. Brewing is so much more than just brewing to me. It really is. The brewing is like the way, it's like the excuse to do this, right? Like I love beer. I'm so passionate about it. But like the act of brewing is just kind of like a means to an end. It's the community, it's the camaraderie, it's like the joy, the memories that come from beer, the memories created by brewing beer. So like the brewing is the excuse that I have to go out and collect herbs and get to know people and hang out and just share this, and to make something with my hands and be proud of that. So if you were to go out and just like I said, just decimate a plant population because it's like, oh, that's there, and like I don't know, it belongs to me, so I'm just going to take it all, and then you lose all that, and you've lost kind of the magic of why we're doing this.
Yeah.
That's
Have you found that visitors to the brewery who are drinking these beers and who are then eating the snacks along with it, or eating the raw ingredients along with it, that you've been able to build a better appreciation for locals of what's around them?
Yeah, I think there's three things. So one, thing that happened that was really funny was my dad had brought out some investors when we first opened, and our beer garden doesn't have music except when we do live music. But like we don't have speakers, and there's not a lot going on. It's just like some picnic tables out in the trees. And when people first go out there, they're like, oh man, you got to put this out here, and you got to put pickleball courts, and you got to have music, and you got to do all this stuff. And then like it's like 15 to 20 minutes later, you can visibly see their shoulders just kind of like drop, and they settle in, and they look around, and they just go, oh, I get it now. You just like, you can't help but be like calmed and relaxed by the place, which is so cool. And that's kind of the goal. And I literally completely forgot the other two things I was going to say just now. What was the question?
But you are making a connection to the land through the beers where people are understanding it in a new way.
Yes. So the other things I was going to say was that there's two goals that I have with Beerburg, kind of with doing this. And that's when I go and visit another place, I do love to try what people are passionate about. So if that's IPAs, I'd love to try your IPA. But what I really seek out is like, what can I get here that I can't get at home? And I want to get to know a place. Like I don't visit a place to go sit in a hotel or something and just like, get drunk or something. I want to really understand like what are you guys doing here, and like what is this place, and what can I learn about it. And so I wanted people who visit to try beers with ingredients that they may not have tried before, or that help them connect to the place, help them understand it, get both like an emotional and physical understanding of like what Texas is and what it has to offer from a nature standpoint. And then also for me, like I was saying earlier, there's plants that I always thought like, okay, like mesquite trees. I was always like, oh, stupid mesquite trees. They have thorns, and they're like invasive, and they take over, and nobody likes them, and mesquites are stupid. And then I figured out in brewing that they have these beans that taste like this amazing, super sweet toffee flavor that is one of the coolest brewing ingredients I've come across. And then once I started gathering the beans, I ended up spending a lot of time around mesquite trees. And now I find them like so beautiful and so cool. And I use the wood. I've like smoked grains with mesquite wood. I'm making tap handles and mugs out of mesquite. It's like this beautiful red color.
And mugs. That's cool.
Oh yeah. One of the GM at Beerburg is he's like an amateur woodworker. So he's like making us these wooden mugs for our mug club, and the mesquite wood is insanely dense, so it chews up his blades, but it's really cool. But yeah, the wood is good for smoking. Kind of, it's really harsh, but me,
yeah,
good anyway. I'll find a way. And then the leaves are really bitter, a little not tasting good for beer, but they're fun anyway. And then the beans taste great. And so like for me, I now look back at my whole life and I get very nostalgic about all my experiences around mesquite trees, because I have this new appreciation and understanding for it. And when I sip a beer made with mesquite, it does bring me back to that. And so yeah, this dual element of giving people this sense of home and comfort and connection to things and places that they've been in their whole life, and then also people visiting, getting to know a place. Like that's what I really enjoy about Beerburg.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
For the folks who are inclined to get on planes or to drive into hill country, where can they find you online? Where's all of the various social handles that they should be aware of?
Yeah. I think it's just beerburgbrewing.com, and then Beerburg Brewing on Instagram. I think that's pretty much it. I try to make some fun educational videos on Instagram every once in a while.
Yeah.
to talk about like, okay, this like I know I didn't say, this is probably going to frustrate people that I didn't say like how much I'd use of each ingredient.
That's fine.
But I also want to like open this up, like anybody who's interested. I always had such imposter syndrome that I never wanted to reach out. Like I still don't reach out to Scratch because I'm like, I'm not worthy. But like, please reach out, and like I will share every recipe, every ingredient. I have no problem giving out this knowledge because I worked really hard to find it and I found it incredibly fun. And if you want to do that journey on your own, great. But I'm here for you. I got books, I got resources. Let me know.
That's awesome. Hey, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Are you a brewer or a home brewer who's been foraging? If so, tell me what you found and what you've made. You can email me. It's John Hall. That's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com, or you can tell me about it on Twitter at John_Hall. That's also how you can get in touch with questions, comments, and guest suggestions. A reminder, go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, and you can read great new content as well as the archives going back to 1979. Don't forget, follow All About Beer on social media at All About Beer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, you can email us at info@allaboutbeer.com, or simply go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer if you want to support us. Don't forget, All About Beer has a podcast channel now. You can search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday, and the BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. As for the show, Nate Weber does the music, Jeff Quinn designed our logo, and I'm John Hall. New episodes release every Wednesday, and that's when I'm going to be back again to drink beer and to think beer.